Welcome to episode 11 of the Forgotten Fields Project, a look at farming, present and past. Alongside Tara Williamson, I'm meteorologist Robin Reed, keeping an eye on the skies in mid-May. As we record, the skies are dark, and the official forecast is for up to 5 inches of rain in some locations over a 1-week period. No doubt, getting hay up has been top of mind for some of our farmers. We have a very special guest on tap for you. Dr. Megan Seibel is the keeper of lots of interesting farming news, and we're going to tap into that knowledge next. Stay with us. Hey, Tara. How are you?
Yeah, a little damp, yeah.
That was such a stupid question, but yeah, it's
wasn't.
really wet out there. So I was thinking about Mother's Day, and I was thinking about Tom, and I was thinking about Jack, and I was thinking about how things were on the farm, and I'm imagining that your boys gave you a day of relaxation and fun and did all the work for you, and you just goofed off. How am I doing here?
I thought it was funny at first how you said you thought of Mother's Day and you thought of Tom
Right,
and
well.
Jack, and then there was no mention of me in there.
That's
which
right.
was good at first.
That's right.
What was in the farming world? There's no Hallmark holidays ever. So we actually did hay together, kind of yesterday, all day, and then I screwed up something. Surprise on the farm while
wow.
learning and had to.
You broke it?
Well, my first time using the skid steer to try to move hay, and I thought I did a really good job. I moved 11 out of 12 bales fine, and then I caught the wrap under one of them and just pulled the wrap right off and ended up getting an antique pitchfork and pitching hay for an hour and a half
Okay.
to fix that 5-minute mistake.
Nicely done.
So, yeah.
Nicely done. Well, it wasn't a Mother's Day thing, but today I received my very first zero-turn mower. And it was raining when they delivered it, so they said, we can't train you on how to use this today, but, take your time, figure it out before you go. And I am just so looking forward to this, but I can see with my left-handed nature that this could be a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time we do our next episode, we'll find out what
the damage is?
what I steer skidded into or
Right.
whatever. Yeah, so that's that. But it's a beastly looking machine. I'm excited.
Oh, God. Mowers are still in the back of my head as a triggering from the
No, yeah.
fire.
There was a barn fire, as I recall, and it was connected to a hot lawnmower somehow, some way. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
That's
I can see why that's a trigger for you. One of the things that I guess I'm most excited about today is that a friend of mine is here. Well, I consider her a friend, but she's one of these people that is doing so many things in the farming world. And I was sort of introduced to some of the progress that was going on in the Seibel family through their children. They've all grown now, and I think they're all out of college. We'll find out here soon enough. But boy, what an amazing run they had of farming, learning, being on a farm, leading farm groups of many types, Future Farmers of America, that sort of thing. So I've known her for a long time there. But if you look her up and you find out what she really does for a living, it's at Virginia Tech, where she is the leader of the VALOR program, the Virginia Agriculture Leaders Obtaining Results. Tara, there's a concept, obtaining results with what we're doing. How about that?
It's quite novel.
I'm game for that. She's also the director and co-founder for the Cooperative Problem Solving CCPS, Senior Extension Specialist as well, and the president of the Roanoke County Farm Bureau. Like she doesn't have enough time for anything else. She is also the owner of a vineyard in Bonsack in Botetourt County. With that busy schedule, we are delighted to have her here. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin and Tara. I'm excited for our conversation, and this is an enjoyable way to spend a rainy afternoon.
I gave her directions to our podcast studio, and I forgot to warn her that E.T. is sitting in the barn looking out over, everybody that comes in. And she texted me and said, am I in the right place?
I was looking for a distinguishing marker, and it certainly was it.
Oh, my gosh.
Should have warned her about that just a little bit. So anyway, it is a delight to have you here. Why don't you begin just a little bit by introducing yourself to the audience and telling them what is keeping you up at night these days?
Oh, thanks for having me. I am one of those married into agriculture types and grew up in Northern Virginia, military family outside of the DC area. I actually was a peds oncology nurse at Georgetown when I met my husband at a business conference for high school youth to learn about cooperative business structures, of all things. I was on the planning board there, and he brought some of his ag students to the conference, and we met and then followed up the following year, and the rest is history. So moved on down the valley.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So
All I know, Tara, 100% of the time, it's go, 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 go with this family. I mean, go, go, go with this family. So I think some of the questions we have for today are very specific in some cases and then more general in others. But overall, what is the overarching theme that we're going to try to discuss today?
Well, we're kind of discovering and delving into a completely new concept, at least for me, up until recently. I've heard of solar farming, and I know what solar farms are with solar panels on them, but also the agrivoltaics concept, which is relatively new and kind of a buzzword recently. So kind of want to get into what is that, what's going on, legislation, regulation behind it, just general concept, and what can we kind of be, is anything on the horizon we should be on the lookout for, close to home, and what does that mean for the future?
yeah, it's a hot topic for sure. I think where we're located and given the topography and the mountains and rolling hills, and we aren't maybe quite as hot a target as some of the wider open land spaces in Virginia, but Virginia is definitely one of those places where it's growing fast. And Virginia is actually one of the top 10 states in the country for energy production based on solar arrays at this point. So it's a loaded topic, and there's a lot of debate about even the ability to call it solar farming when you look up the traditional definitions of farming. And I also find it ironic that capacity and production efficiency are some of the major criticisms of it, and we're sitting here on a very cloudy week, and that's definitely going to be one of those things that we think about when the weather's like this too.
Yeah. So what is solar farming and agrivoltaics then?
So it's interesting. They use the word solar farming, I think, because the fact that it goes in on kind of big areas of land, and some people will argue that you're producing something from that land in the way of energy, for example, solar energy. But when you look up the traditional definitions of crops and animals that are typically there and agriculture coupled with it, that's where people sort of get into the sticky wicket. Interestingly, I think when they were thinking about pulling really good production land out of production and what they could do to offset that a little bit, agrivoltaics became a really popular concept. And essentially that is the idea of raising crops or animals in conjunction with the solar arrays. But there's some limitations to that, and certainly some challenges as far as whether or not that actually solves the problem, so to speak, and or causes other complications.
Maybe not as synergistic as we were hoping for.
No, not initially.
Okay.
So, from a farmer's perspective, what are we talking about in terms of crops or livestock systems that are compatible with a solar array being on the farm? Are they in the way? Do they connect well? How does that work?
So I've heard this conversation shift actually quite a bit over the years, and I can remember as long as almost 10 years ago, someone saying that if we put the panels high enough, you could raise larger animals underneath of them. Traditionally, outside of the U.S., the thought was maybe sheep or those kinds of grazing animals. That tends to be the most popular. I actually visited a really large agrivoltaics installation in Ottawa about 3.5 years ago, and there was some things that made both the farming family happy that had the animals, and then also the family that was running the energy installation. There are some issues with damage to the panels and, in some cases, some harm to curious animals that get themselves hung up in wires or bonk their heads in the corner of the panel. Sheep, the wisest of all creatures, right?
You've got a couple weird animals that would do stuff like that, don't you?
Mine have such a will to live. This is so unusual.
Yeah. So anyway, the height of the panels and things like that come into play. I do know of a couple of unfortunate instances where that was the original intent, but by the time the topsoil was removed to put the panels in, there wasn't a lot of really good grazing capacity left for the animals underneath. So I think those are some of those things people are going to wait to sort out.
Percentage of use for these solar farms for the actual land are we seeing used for cropland versus small ruminants then?
Oh, I'm not even sure that I've ever seen an installation where there were actual crops underneath, because they're they create so much shade. So even though a lot of them rotate and follow the sun, depending on what you're trying to grow underneath of them. And then the other problem is, how do you harvest that crop?
Right.
So even mowing around them and keeping the weeds and things down so that they don't interfere with the solar production is a little
Very
bit
short,
tricky.
shade tolerant crop, which is going to be very limiting.
Exactly. So, but to get something out that you could windrow and bale would be difficult.
Yes, especially with the spacing, with our actual. I mean, you'd have to such specialized, narrow equipment to go through that.
Yeah.
Nothing. I mean, I take out everything anyway. Sometimes.
Although Robin's zero turn would probably work
There-
if he wanted to spend,
Challenge on.
hundreds of
Yes.
hundreds
Challenge.
of hours.
True. So quite a few limitations and restrictions there. Okay. Now, do we have any around this area that we know of?
Trying to think if I've seen one in this area in particular. I can't think of one. So there was the closest one that I can think of that was intended to be sort of an agrivoltaics attempt was down in Wytheville several years ago. But interestingly, in that case, the landowner, the solar contract was resold 3 different times, and the most recent owner of it had a different idea. And so the way they pulled the topsoil off, it's not going to work necessarily for the animal crops, and inhibits the farmer's ability to actually go into the space that's been carved out for the solar. So there's a lot of litigation with that particular issue, but it didn't necessarily go as planned. And the others that I've seen up and down the valley also do not have animals on them successfully at this point in time.
Okay. All right. So not too much activity in our area quite yet.
No.
All right. Do you think it's going to gain momentum in the future?
I think if the push to put these large commercial scale facilities in, they're going to have to do something about that. The numbers are startling when you think about the numbers of acres that are going to have to go into solar production in order to provide enough electricity for what they're projected our need to be. And so the only way they're going to be able to do that is to figure out a way to basically conjoin those types of operations and have some gain off of it. Or, maybe those of us in agriculture can convince the power companies to just put it in on all of the distribution centers that are being built and rethink their roof infrastructure.
Yes. Okay.
Or reclaimed mine land. That's another big pet peeve of mine, and
Reclaimed
hope that they
mine.
could do some. Yeah, so down in Southwest, there's a lot of privately owned land, which is a little bit tricky, and then some federally owned land, but there's a lot of surface mines that have been reclaimed. And I've always thought if you could figure out a way to increase the carbon on them and grow some grazing things, you could have some grazing land there that might work for agrivoltaics. The power companies tend to disagree with putting them that far out into the Coleridge, though, because they're too far off of the grid, and it costs the power companies more money than to get the electricity back. So,
Okay. So it's a little bit more on their end, and therefore.
yeah, it's a little bit more on their end.
Okay. But right now, as it stands, it's not too arable the way it is. They would actually have to build up some
No,
type of.
they've got some scrub trees and things going,
Okay.
but the ongoing autumn olive debate.
Oh, the autumn olives. Yeah.
Well, from a news standpoint, a general information standpoint, there's a couple things going on right now that are not necessarily connected to this, but I wonder if somehow people just get negative attitudes about technology. Right now, data centers are a hot talking point. If you live in Northern Virginia, you're surrounded by these monstrous warehouses filled with computers that suck energy like crazy and strangely make a lot of noise. And so the localities are beginning to have sort of negative thoughts about that. And as that tries to move to Southern Virginia, there's been a fair amount of pushback. Is it possible that some of the solar initiatives and some of the wind initiatives are somehow getting mixed up with this negativity about technology anywhere near a farm?
That's a really interesting question because, perception's always in the eye of the beholder, and people tend to pick up whatever sensational piece of information is in front of them and run with it. I do think that the trick is going to be figuring out what communication looks like between those groups, though, and making sure that the right facts get out. So, you mentioned data centers, and I've heard a couple of different things recently. Last fall, a presentation by an engineer that basically, in running the math, said that in order to support the existing data centers in Virginia, it was going to take a little over 3,000 square miles of solar panels in Virginia in order to sustain that one. And that's before the announcements of these additional data centers that are going in and not taking into consideration other commercial or residential use for that power. And in December, actually, there was a study published that VCU partnered with the Department of Conservation and Recreation and also the Department of Forestry with, and they were looking at sort of what the projected numbers were. And to meet the clean energy legislation or what's been proposed, they were saying, for example, they think 16,000 megawatts of electricity is going to be in the public's interest in the next 20 years or so. As of June 2024, there were 4,000 megawatts being produced. The first facility went in and produced 5 in 2016. So that increase there happened in 8 years. But when you look at the numbers of farms in Virginia, the average farm in Virginia is 186 acres. So if it's going to take 16,000 megawatts to be in the public's best interest at 7 acres, roughly a megawatt, which is where we are in Virginia right now, that's over 602 average size farms in Virginia that are going to have to give up to solar. And I think given the need for the data centers and then all of these other things, we're talking about electric vehicle charging and other things that are going to consume more and more electricity, it will be impossible to do it solely on solar.
Okay, you did it on purpose, bringing up the data center stuff to try to...
You're welcome.
...purposely aggravate and poke at me. So, being from Northern Virginia, that's all there is up there.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's a completely different subject. But it almost seems like we're at odds. We're talking about land use, and we're talking about arable, farmable land, which is making energy for us, our bodies, food production, which I would assume you'd want to keep domestically here, right? Because that's a primary resource that literally supports your life and your society. So I think that would be paramount. And now we're talking about, well, how can we better support and fulfill these needs for energy usage elsewhere, electricity. But it's never about how to cap and better maintain and mitigate issues with energy consumption here and usage. It's now how can we use our arable, farmable land? Oh, it's very interesting valuation, just a difference in values. But I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a conundrum. And so a lot of times you'll hear as an argument for people who have either decided to sell the family farm, quote unquote, for solar, that's their prerogative as the landowners and that they have, rights to do what they want with it. And then you'll hear other people who are really kind of push hard on what that is. And I think, and there's a legislator we have in Virginia who was multi-generation family operation, and they actually just sold for a data center. Actually, that's going to go in on their family farm, and so it's a tricky thing. I think localities are getting caught, and then what will happen? We'll have to wait and see if the localities will be able to make those decisions about what land can get put into the solar arrays and what land might not be able to, or is it really just going to be a land rights issue for the landowner? Because they can classify land as, highly productive, prime farmland, and they can also classify it as something else. But
are there any zoning classifications that you've seen as examples elsewhere?
So there's some different. So I have really good friends with somebody who's involved with the county government in Pittsylvania County, and farms a number of acres, has different kinds of row crops on leased and owned land. And interestingly, one of the things that he was hoping that they were going to propose in that part of the state was kind of energy sectors, just like you'd have, kind of ag sectors and different land use things, so that there would actually be kind of an energy land use for the places that would work for the solar companies, but not necessarily pull their cropland out of production. So there, and then there's an ongoing rub. There in particular, they had tens of, close to 2,000, now I need to think of the actual number. I think he said 16 or 17,000 acres that had been proposed to go under contract before the Board of Supervisors found out about it, because the electric companies had gone and pulled land records and had gone door to door to landowners to make the pitch before the county was aware that they were doing that. And so that's, when we think about already how difficult it is to pass land from generation to generation, but then again, it gets into the rights of the landowner when people start arguing about what they want to do when those dollar signs are presented to them.
I'm just curious to see how we're going to apply that, or when we need to start thinking about zoning. I would say we should, if it seems like it's even leering on the horizon, that we should probably start thinking now.
One argument I did hear, and I thought was really fascinating and be interesting to see where it goes. They were talking about we'll use Northern Virginia, and I'm from Northern Virginia too, right? So a data center in Northern Virginia, multiple data centers in Northern Virginia, for example, that then need X number of acres worth of production in order to operate. But it was this sort of ethical dilemma then. Do you have, just because there's a larger population and some decision makers in one locality, do they have the right to then have that future driven off the backs of people who can't make those decisions for themselves, or have something to share, so to speak, as by way of, in the best public interest, let us have your land, kind of an argument, which is really difficult for people to have to face, and it raises a lot of ethical kinds of questions. I've heard those kinds of things come up over the years with, workforce reallocation and how we combat brain drain in different parts of Virginia, and there are those ethical conundrums between progress and preservation.
Yes, gosh, absolutely.
So this is a pivot, but I love the ethics thing.
I thought that you were going to jump in because don't you teach
Yes,
ethics? So
yes. I just finished grading 45 papers on such subjects as that, but I'll give that a break for now because my brain is tired. It's a very tired brain.
As it should be at the end of the semester.
As it should be. This one's a weird question, but let me see if I can make this make sense. You grow grapes.
Yes.
You and weather have a love-hate relationship in the spring when cold air at the last 24 to 48 hours of when a bud is doing its thing can cause significant damage and loss to you. But correct me if I'm wrong, but when that happens, you have hopes for next year. It's mostly not a permanent thing. It's a seasonal thing, and you get to try again next year and look at the weather gods and say, hey, you owe me one this time.
Yeah,
because of what happened last year.
Right.
When you're talking about farmland and solar development, that sounds like a fairly more permanent kind of an idea. And so if there is loss of producing acreage, whether it be foods or vegetables or whether it be fruit or whatever, it seems somehow that might be just a little bit more permanent. Is that how you see it? If we go solar or we go, I don't know, big wind farm or whatever it is that a permanent loss of farmland?
So interestingly, I would say when you bring up solar and wind, solar, in my mind, I think may be more of a semi-permanent or permanent loss than wind. There's a huge wind farm. I mean, they're all across the Midwest, but I visited one in Indiana, and the corn is literally, within 15 feet of every one of the wind turbines. And they're high up in the air. They have their own issues for birds and migrating kinds of things, but there's a lot of crop production in particular that happens right below them. The harder part, I think, with solar is the way the fields are put in and the infrastructure, the metal, the electric, all of those kinds of things. And depending on how much grading has to happen, you're talking about the removal of topsoil, which takes thousands of years to develop. And so to say, we're going to lose the next 20 years worth of vegetable production or cotton production is only part of the equation, because it isn't going to be as simple as just ripping it out and putting a crop back in. And so they have yet to really prove. They say it can be done, but they've yet to prove that it can actually be reinstated. There are clauses in the contracts that say that they have to reinstate it. But I think the kind of permanence of it are the scarier pieces, in that they really don't know that they're going to be operational into capacity for the period of time in which they're saying. And should they start to phase out, then they actually come in and they'll replace panels with newer technology and those kinds of things. But depending on how those upgrades are done, and if they're done, and then you look at the numbers for what we're actually going to need, things are going to phase out faster than they're installed and replaced in order to meet those numbers. So it's going to be a long-term cycle that we're in.
I don't like those little clauses that you put in there to check that box, and it gives a slight little bit of reassurance, and that helps you justify, giving up your land for this.
Yeah.
And then once they are decommissioned, which we don't have a proper example where it's worked out this way yet.
No.
Once it's decommissioned, who does come in, remove, and rehabilitate and get it back up to snuff?
They're supposed to. And then, there's the ongoing argument of Well, we think that certain components inside of the panels will be recyclable, right? We can claim the certain types of metals back out of them, for example. But there's a lot of plastic, there's a lot of metal and steel, there's a lot of things that aren't biodegradable. Those all have to go somewhere to get disposed of. So it convolutes this issue we have already about the kinds of things that are going back into our environment that are going to cause impacts on that environment in the name of saving the environment.
Right.
So
It's almost like a type of, I don't want to say greenwashing, but it could be greenwashing.
I mean, the same with the car. With batteries, car batteries are in the same category, and they really just don't know what the long-term environmental impact is going to be of them.
So something I just thought of that I'll throw out here is, because you want to actually visit these in Ottawa and such, right? How many of these companies would you say are domestic companies versus foreign?
Oh, that's a really good question. Anymore, I feel like the economy is so global that we may have a company that's based in the U.S. but may not be fully owned by domestic entities. So that's a really difficult question to ask or to answer. I will say the one that I visited just in March up in the Valley, the company rep came in from North Carolina to meet with us and has multiple deals up and down that region, but is one of multiple companies that are all operating in the same region. And so you may have two adjacent farms who aren't even contracting with the same sort of sales and infrastructure company, so to speak, even though they may be feeding electricity to the same power company on the grid. So all of those contracts are nuanced, and in some cases they can be sold and resold. The one that I shared with you down in the Wytheville area was an Israeli company, and not even a U.S. company. So.
And these, to go back to the very, very basics at the beginning, the 101 of this, the actual farmer, if they're presented, like get paperwork all the time now. I talked to a really, really big farmer in Botetourt just 2 days ago, and they get stuff constantly in the mail and calls, trying to get them to work with them. Who in these general agreements, who ends up owning the land? Does the farmer retain any ownership at all, or are they now working with whoever's going to be buying it?
So in my understanding, they have access to it. They have to maintain the ground underneath of it, and ultimately will retain ownership of it because it'll come back to them. But it's an access point in the duration. The ones that I've heard that have been problematic are where they actually technically, quote unquote, own the land, but they are not allowed on the land because they can't go inside of, like if the contract is in dispute, they may not be allowed to go into the footprint of the solar array, even though it's on their property. But they do have, most of them say that the one in the Valley is thrilled with the contract. He thinks the payment schedule's good. He believes the company is going to do what it says it's going to do. And so for them, it made sense because neither of them wanted to produce animals or crops or livestock off of it. It's not an agrivoltaics situation. It's a straight up solar array. On land adjacent to Interstate 81. So.
Okay. All right. Because the back of my mind, I was thinking that would be a concern I could see kind of brewing if non-domestic entities were owning our food.
Now, I think there are plenty of cases, though, where foreign entities are buying land that is available for sale, and then they own the land and the infrastructure on it as well. So, and then that prevents it from being sold to somebody domestically for that period of time.
She brings up a good point that we've talked about often on this podcast, and that is the loss of farmland to business decisions. And very often, once the sale occurs, that's it. Lights out. It's not going to be farmland, at least in a reasonable period of time.
Right.
Once you put a house on a thing and, septic systems or whatever. So is this all part of that same mix where if you sell off enough land, and this is a Forgotten Fields project, once you sell it off for the greater good of whatever, that seems to put agriculture at great risk in some places.
I think it does, absolutely. And, people may argue the average farm in Virginia is small, right? 186 acres I looked up. There used to be statistics floating around when I first married into it, and they'd say, the average farmer in Virginia provides some sort of product, animal or vegetable or fiber, for about 150 families. So somebody might look at it and say, well, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge number. But when you add it up, it does start adding up. And when we think about at the same time, in the U.S., we've got farm-owned sort of conglomerate or, commercial grade farms that are very, very large. They're getting larger. And then we've got very small scale niche sort of farms for people who are really interested in providing for their own families or for their localities. And so there's been for a while this trend to kind of hollow out in the middle. And I think if something like this comes in and the price tag is attractive, people have off-farm jobs that they need to worry with, their children may or may not be interested in coming on immediately, it's very tempting to do that. But once you talk about a 30 or 40-year decision that you're now making, coupled with this idea that with each successive generation, we're already 4.5 generations removed from the family farm as far as the general population goes. So what's to say that if you don't do anything in your family farming related, that 2 generations from now, all of a sudden they're going to decide that this is a great idea and they want to go back into it. So we're expanding the potential for people to not want to take it back into production once it's out.
Completely true. Yeah, I mean, we were sitting in that ourselves, our family. Yeah. Ready to take it back, but it was already sold. It's already actually a plantation. It's already gone.
Yeah, and think exactly. The development in this county is tremendous, and we're on the other side of 81, right on the 460 corridor. So where we are, there's one other farm that's trying to hold on. The third has been sold, and there will be a huge housing development there.
Yeah.
That's going to be built out over the next 10 years or so, and so. Those shifts happen. We actually get solicitations in the mail, less so for solar, I think, because we're steep enough, but more for battery storage. So they're trying to sell us on these big battery boxes that aren't that loud, quote unquote, to store all of the energy that they think is going to be coming in off of the grid. And they say they're not that unattractive. I'm like, except that I'm worried about the view, and I don't really want this big battery box.
How they're trying to minimize it with that type of language. Yeah,
yeah,
it's not that unhealthy.
It's just a big metal box with a fence around it. So, but the pressures are hard.
Well, I mean, you still have a good point about like every decision we make, the amount of weight of responsibility and accountability, and it's not just for us. I mean, us humans, we want to think long term, but we're pretty myopic and narrow and short sighted. But this is a lot for the next generation, 20, 25, 50 years.
It's a
with
lot.
Enough of us making these same little changes at the same time, whole areas, vast swaths.
It's a lot. I think to me it gets overwhelming when I start thinking, okay, I'm one person in a county in a single state, and that state is part of a country. Well, then all of a sudden that country is part of a world. Mm-hmm. And we can say in the U.S., for example, we're going to be environmentally responsible, and we're going to think about sustainability, and we're going to think long-term about what our footprint is and what our impact is on, ozone and methane emissions, for example. The kicker is, as we make those shifts, there are other parts of the world that are shifting the other direction. So, I've had a chance, thankfully, because of running the VALOR program, to travel. Each class goes internationally. And in Southeast Asia, for example, as their middle class begins to grow and there's such a demand for animal proteins, they are putting in what we would call commercial animal, hog and poultry operations. And we're trying to lessen those in the U.S., and they're building them faster than we can take them out because they need that. Plastic usage is astronomical in other places, not just in the U.S. And so, and you're talking about countries that completely jumped over landline technology and went straight to wireless. So even though they don't have the ability to have data center infrastructure, and so maybe they might not do the entirety of everything online where they need all of that, they will need that at some point. But everybody jokes about when the electricity goes out, you can still plug in your landline phone if you own one and get on a call, where you can't if the power's out other places. And so what about places that don't even have that infrastructure? Everything is electric based or power based.
God, yeah, you take the ground out beneath everything.
Yeah.
Cool.
That is. Time for a stupid question time from Robin. So it goes something like this. And it'll be both positive and negative, because it's so easy to just say, hey, what's wrong? What's bad? Okay. Things that keep you up at night and things that you're most excited about looking forward in the next 5 years.
Related to this topic?
Related to things that keep you up at night, somehow agriculturally.
Things that keep me up at night agriculturally is the sustainability and future of my own family farm. and whether or not we are going to be able to pull off what we're hoping to execute from a transition standpoint. And after empty nesting and at our ages, thinking, we're both well into, if not crossing the threshold of middle age, and thinking about starting an entire new business venture, that's daunting, and it definitely keeps me awake at night. But at the same time, we talk about it as framing what the next 25 years will hold. So that's even though we might not be here in 25 years, hopefully somebody will be. So that's a big piece of it. The things I think that are exciting to me in general, and COVID probably had a big piece of this, but there does seem to be more interest in agriculture in general and where things come from and how they're produced. I wish more people would learn to cook maybe than order the Tavala cooker thing off TV where they just scan the QR code and stick they're having beautiful fresh meals. So I'm going to give them that, right? They're not all fully processed, but they still don't really understand how to prepare the products that are in there. But I think in general, there's more interest in the implications for it and the complexities of some of these issues that people have to be aware of.
What I'd like to do is sort of wrap up this questioning barrage on her, because you know what? There is, and immediately Tara's gone to the sheet to see what it is I've forgotten, and she's forgotten to ask. But in as much as we have occupied Megan's time, she now knows where we live. She now knows where the studio is. So when we invite her back, she'll come on a day that she can come, especially if she hasn't double booked herself or triple booked herself, which is sometimes the case for all of us. But anyway, finish us out with just your overall view of the challenges ahead. Your husband is often well informed and talking about these things, and Andy's got his finger on the pulse. You've got your finger on the pulse. Tara's in the middle of the pulse, and I'm trying to educate on the side of this pulse. Where are we? What are we doing? Are we in good shape, or are we on a trend? How do you feel overall about agriculture, the new technologies that are creeping into that space? Are we on a good pathway?
Yes, I think generally speaking, we are. There are higher than ever numbers of youth that are interested in, I'll take FFA, for example, largest youth-led organization in the country, ag-centric, and their membership is at an all-time high. There are people who are asking a lot of really good questions. The interesting thing about ag is that it is attractive to people who might not have been in ag. So you mentioned technology, for example. So a lot of people who are coming into technology and innovation and have those ideas are seeing the opportunity to apply them in ag-related sectors. And that's the fastest growing area for them to be a part of that. But I think very simply speaking, the more people can just sort of understand it. And I can remember speaking to the Rotary Club in Roanoke City, actually probably 10 or 12 years ago. And I remember getting there for the meeting, and I overheard someone say, I think there's some lady that's here today to talk about agriculture, but we're not entirely sure. And I thought, well, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. But, as an educator, and, a lot of people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, and it's talked about a lot. But what I simply said to them was, as an organization, as a city, as a community, you are dependent on people being able to be entrepreneurial and contribute back to society, and they cannot self-actualize in a way that does that unless their physiological needs are met. And there is one industry at the end of the day that meets all of those basic needs for people. And so you have to care about ag, and you have to care about farming. And then they thought, well, that was a really interesting way to think about that. So it sounds a little tongue-in-cheek to say that we provide food and clothes for people, but that's what we do.
Exactly. Tara, our season is just getting started this spring. We're rolling along. So, quick check in with you. What's on the short term? What's on the short term schedule here?
What
for you? Your farm, your people.
I have to comment on what she said though.
Oh, okay.
That's such a. I mean, it's so.
Well, it was deep and good.
It's even more poignant than that, because what you brought up is, and you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy and stuff, your outputs are only ever as good as your inputs.
Yeah,
that's it.
Absolutely
and
true.
People, you never think about that. I mean, you're talking about the most fundamental unit going into your body. We care about our phones, the latest model with fashion trends and everything, but we never think about what we're putting into our bodies. And it's such a heavy thing to come to terms with, that maybe we've kind of forgotten that link that keeps us alive and keeps us nourished.
And
keeps
we've
us
taken for
growing.
granted how few people are making that happen for
Yes.
everyone else. So
Yes. So I think we just need to reevaluate our relationship with ourselves and where our nourishment, literally our life force, comes from.
exactly.
Yeah. Maybe shed some respect where respect's due, perhaps.
Sounds good to me.
But my plans,
Yes.
um, on the ground in the real world, I don't- cut this out. Cut this part about the sheep. But I hope all the sheep live. It's always a struggle. So I won't even get into that. It'll be a little bit too morbid for people. But hey, hopefully the weathermen will be able to forecast everything.
Good
correctly.
luck with that. Good luck with that.
And I have now learned how to read the clouds better, which has been fun. Not that it means anything over with us with Tinker Mountain still splitting everything, but so hopefully all hay will get up and I won't crash anything else with the skid steer.
I hope not. On the farm, Bonsack is a beautiful place. If you're at a strip mall looking up off in the distance, there it is, shining, looking
There
good.
it is.
What's the short term look like for you guys?
I'm trying to figure out right now, actually in the middle of figuring out what fruit we're going to sell and what fruit we're going to retain for the year, and thinking forward to next year to varieties that we may replant where we pulled some vines out due to insect-borne illnesses this winter. And but on the very short horizon, my youngest is graduating from Virginia Tech on Thursday evening, so looking forward to celebrating as a family.
Did he go to the concert?
No, he did not, but he does work for football operations, and so I got to see FaceTime video of him turning out the lights in the athletic region a couple nights before the concert, and it's pretty wild to see what Lane Stadium looks like completely empty with no grass on the field.
Crazy. And that was an inside line. I should tell people Metallica, of course, was in town.
Yes,
and
Metallica.
there was a small earthquake. They measured it out, and they knew it would show up well on the seismograph. It ended up being like a 1-point-something earthquake.
Yeah.
Not bad for 65,000, 70,000 people jumping up and down.
That's happened before at games, I will say.
Yeah.
But maybe not
This
quite
one
to
just
that
seemed more
level.
intense at night with all those lights.
Exactly.
So that was an amazing thing. Wonderful. Gosh, what a great conversation. You got to invite her back. That's all I got to tell you. You got to invite her
Yeah,
back.
Thanks for having
Come
me.
back and join us again.
Super fun.
This is
Absolutely.
delightful. Well, we appreciate it very much.
The executive producer of Forgotten Fields is Teresa Reed. Interview segments are conducted by Tara Williamson. Our resident mythbuster is Tom Williamson. For Robin Reed, resident meteorologist and broadcast engineer, we hope you'll join us next time.
So that'll do it for us. Thanks for joining us. Farm safe. Until next time.